Today's session is about completing the case overview. I think in hindsight, it would have been actually great to have had today as a Teams meeting where, you know, we could have had, or it would have enabled more easily perhaps the interaction between us. So what we've built into the session today, as you'll see, are three distinct areas where we'll actually stop and take questions, and Rachel and Mandy are here from the early career team as well. And if you want to type your questions into the chat, then we can answer those as we go along. Could I just ask that while we go through this, if you could put any mics on mute or anything as we go, if you've got that option. It's just there's a wee bit background noise there. So three areas that we're going to cover today. The first one being basically why do we need the case overview? What's the purpose of the case overview? The second section, I'll take us actually through the form and give you either a refresher around that or introduce it to you for the first time. Stop for questions again at that point, and then we'll just touch on so what happens next. What's the purpose of the case overview in terms of you'll no doubt all have heard about things going to panel and things like that. So we'll just touch on what the process is for that as we go through. If there are any questions that you don't want to put on such a public forum, if you like, I've put my email address and things at the end, so please don't hesitate to get in touch that way, and I can get back to everybody that way if there's something you'd much prefer to talk about in confidence. Okay, so the case overview form that is required. The good news is that if you have a probationer who is recommended for a health extension, then a case overview is not required. Okay, the instances when a case overview is required is if you are making a recommendation in June for an extension for competence, or for health and competence, or for cancellation, then a case overview is required. The thing about the case overview is that it's supposed to be, I suppose, a gathering of evidence across the year. So I would advise that the earlier that you start thinking that this might not be a satisfactory recommendation at the end of the year in terms of awarding full registration, that you start to gather things towards the case overview form. The case overview can be found at the Into Teaching website, and it's in the teacher induction scheme and under the extensions part, and you'll see that there's guidance there around the case overview and actually the template of the form. It is a substantial piece of work, and I think that's, well, I know obviously that's because you want to submit all the pieces of evidence that you have. So it's a lot of work to complete if the probationer is then awarded full registration at the end. So it may be that, for example, if they have had a recommendation of cause for concern competence in December, that now that we're into the start of the year, you might want to start gathering things to put into the case overview, so that if you have to pull it together, you can do so easily and you've got the evidence all there. One of the first things I think I would decide within your school, within the local authority, is who's actually completing the case overview, who's taking that overview. Because what you'll find is that within the case overview, you'll have pieces of information coming from the supporter, you may have some letters from parents, you may have a record of a conversation that's happened between a depute and the probationer. So you've got all these different things. So you need somebody who's going to have the actual overview of it. In some local authorities, it may be the probation manager that pulls it together. So have that conversation with them. It may be that it's combined, you know, a combined effort between both of you, between the school and probation manager, or it could just be the school. So decide that early on. You might also want to speak to somebody, if there's anybody in the school who you know has been through this process before, you may want to have, you know, a conversation with them, because they're bound to have some tips to share with you as well. We don't have a template, a completed template, if you like, to share, because what we've found from experience in the past is that if we have a document that we share the text from, you know, whether it's profiles or case overview, and I understand this, it tends to come in then with that same text. So we leave it, I'm afraid, up to yourselves to complete. The purpose of the case overview is to provide evidence. It's to demonstrate or to clarify what the areas are that are causing concern, that are not satisfactory, and then to evidence what support you have put in place as a school, as a local authority. Okay, so that's the purpose of the case overview, and that's what you're trying to gather within it. So clearly you're trying to show where the probationer has demonstrated that they're not meeting the standard for full registration in the areas that you've highlighted, and you're trying to show as well all the support that has been put into those specific areas, and that despite all that support, they are not satisfactory. So the timescale of the case overview, the sooner you start gathering things together, probably the easier it becomes to actually complete the case overview at the end of the school session. When you complete the case overview, it eventually comes into the GTC. We don't start the next part of the proceedings, if you like, until we receive the case overview from you. And I'll speak about this in the third part of the session. But it's just that bit that the longer it takes you to pull the case overview together, then there's a greater delay in getting a panel set up if that's what needs to happen next. So again, the more prepared you are, the more things that you have to hand in terms of evidence to put into the case overview, then the quicker it will go to panel and the whole thing will be wrapped up. So the sort of evidence that it includes, if, for example, let's say one of the areas that you were highlighting that you know, that was not satisfactory, that was causing us concern, let's say it was around classroom organisation. So the sort of things you would be including in evidence may be feedback from observations, more detailed feedback than is in the profile. The profile is automatically part of the evidence, so you don't need to complete things that are already in the profile, okay, because if it goes to a panel, the panel will read the profiles anyway. So don't include anything that's within the profiles. But if you have more feedback around an observation, that's the sort of thing you'd want to include. If you have observations from, for example, a stage partner who's been in and out of the classroom, or somebody who's done some team teaching and has had some concerns about classroom organisation, it would be worth including something from them. You may have something, for example, at parents' night, that at a parents' evening, somebody has, you know, a parent has raised a concern around the organisation within the classroom, and actually the lack of safety, perhaps, you know, within this particular class. So it's all these sorts of things that you will include as evidence. Any support as well that you have given. So if, for example, you have had somebody that's come in and done some team teaching, you want to include that. You may have suggested at a supporter meeting that the probationer goes and shadows another teacher who's you know, got excellent practice in that area. You want to highlight that sort of thing as well. You may have pointed them in the direction of some professional learning, whether it's been professional reading. You may have brought together some, you know, done a session, let's say, for all the probationers within the school together. If you're in a secondary and you had a small group around classroom organisation. So that's the sort of thing you're wanting to include in terms of evidence. Next thing you have to think about is if the probationer is absent. So if the probationer is absent, the case overview can't be concluded at this stage. You need to wait until the very end of the session or when the probationer returns. So the way I've spoken so far is that a case overview will come in at the end of the school session in June. If you are going for an early cancellation, so let's say, you know, it comes to the end of March and actually you decide that despite all of the support, there's no progress, you're now really concerned for the learning, for the safety of the pupils under the care of the probationer, and you decide to move to a cancellation at this point, then you would submit the case overview just now rather than waiting until June. If, however, the probationer goes off sick and is absent, then you wouldn't submit the case overview until the end of the school session or when they return. Okay. Similarly, if there is an ongoing investigation, so it may be an investigation that's related to one of your areas of the standard that you're concerned about, or it may be that it's completely unrelated, but if there is an investigation that's ongoing, then the case overview can't be submitted at this point, and you'll see that in one of the first questions on the case overview form. Just because obviously the outcome of the investigation may impact on the content of the case overview. And I think what I've probably touched on before are what are the key things that you're trying to show. So you're trying to evidence all of the support that you've put in place and to highlight what your concerns are, okay, at this stage. So I'm going to pause for breath there and just ask, are there any questions around that at the moment that you wish to type in, and we'll pick those up as we go through.
Right, I've got a couple of questions.
You got a couple of questions? Okay.
Yeah. Well, quite a few now. Just bear with me. I'll just read out what's come in. So Vicky's asking, is there a final date for submission, or is it the last date of the school session?
So the final profiles come in, your local authority will set the date for the final profiles in June. And we have a date that's around the 20-something of June for the profiles to be submitted. I think given the context of COVID, we're going to try and move that date back as far as we can to the end of the school session. But there's no, so that's the date for the profile, but there's no set date for the case overview. All I would say is that the sooner we get the case overview without causing sleepless nights and putting undue pressure on anybody, the sooner we get the case overview, the sooner we can move to the next stage of the process. With the profiles coming in at the summer holidays, it works perfectly if we can get the case overview before the summer. But equally, we understand there's a lot of pressure, so if it has to wait until August, then obviously we'll wait until then.
Thanks, Elaine. Just sort of attached to that, I've got someone else asking if you're preparing for an extension, when would be the best time for that form to come into you?
So again, the case overview with an extension is probably more important to be really sort of timely about this, because the extension itself is only for 12 weeks. What we don't want is the extension to have happened, you know, and the case overview not to have arrived with us. So the more promptly we can get the case overview, if it's an extension recommendation, the better, because what happens is once we get the case overview, the probationers contacted and we ask them, you know, do they wish to challenge that or not? So obviously we'd like to be able to do that before the extension had finished.
That's great, and I think that sort of addresses Barry's question here, which is when is the best time to inform the NQT, and as we don't want them to be surprised by that.
Yeah, I would say it's difficult, isn't it? I was going to say the earlier the better. I suppose as soon as you know that that's going to be the recommendation. So if you decide that in May or let's say even in April, I think it would be really worthwhile sharing that with the probationer to say it looks likely that this is going to be the recommendation. But to be fair to the probationer, you need to give them that full window of opportunity, the full length of time. And I would say that this year even more so, because of the schools not being fully open, there's obviously many probationers who have had a recommendation at Christmas that hasn't been satisfactory, but most of them have been pretty stuck in terms of trying to move forward with that because they've not had the benefit of the classroom experience between January and now. So I think we need to be very careful to give them as much time as possible once the schools are fully open to allow them to demonstrate that, you know, that they either have improved in that area or that they're making progress in that area. So just to be aware of that. But I think, you know, in terms of, I wouldn't leave it until the day that the profile is submitted, put it that way, in terms of sharing the recommendation. I think it's kinder to let them know in advance, you know, even a week or two before that, when you know that the time has gone basically to be able to make up the ground, and that it is going to be an extension.
Thanks, Elaine. I've just got a couple more questions, if that's all right with you.
Of course.
Someone's asking what the position might be for NQTs who've been asked to shield at the moment.
Okay, so for those that are shielding, those days don't count as absence. Those days count as some of their virtual days, of which they can have a maximum of 85 virtual days. The problem, I suppose, that they've got, or the difficulty that they've got, is if, for example, there's an area of the standard that is causing concern, let's say that is classroom organisation, you're going to think I've got a thing about classroom organisation, they can't, or, you know, it's very difficult, almost impossible for them to demonstrate that while they're shielding. Unfortunately, that is how it is. There's nothing that we can change about that. To get full registration at the end of the year, we require them to have met all areas of the standard. Just going to, I think, if you maybe missed, yeah, that slide. So I suppose for those that are shielding, it might be that actually they don't meet the minimum number of days, which is 105 for face-to-face days. So it may be that they are required to do an extension, and that would then be, if it's areas of the standard that they have concerns about, then it would be a competence extension. So it would be the standard 12 weeks.
Okay, and there was just one other one just came in there just as you were speaking, and someone's asking, is there ever a time when a supporter can refuse to sign off on a profile because it's not an accurate account, or do you just sign it off and then submit a case overview?
So the case overview, when it's submitted, when the signatures go on to the case overview, everybody's signing it not to say that they agree with the content. What they're signing it to say is that they are aware that this is the information that's being submitted. So very often we have a probationer who doesn't agree with the content or would dispute part of the content, and we simply explain to them that their signature is on there purely to say that they're aware, they've seen what's being submitted. So it doesn't mean that the people need to agree with it.
Great, thanks, Elaine. And another one's just come in, just there, people being inspired by other questions. So someone's just asking, saying it's a silly question, and there's no silly questions, and they're just asking the difference between a cancellation and an extension. So if a cancellation is submitted, is that an immediate stop if the overview is accepted?
Okay, good question. So the difference between cancellation and extension, if a recommendation for extension is made, it's because the probationer is making progress towards the standard for full registration, but they're not quite there yet. And by recommending an extension, it's saying that you're confident that with another 12 weeks of experience within the classroom, they will meet the standard for full registration. Okay, so basically they're making progress, they're getting there, they're just not quite there yet. The difference with cancellation is that there's no progress. So despite all of the support that's gone in, and that could include, as I say, team teaching, it may include a reduction in timetable, a huge amount of support just day to day, that despite all of that, there's no progress. So an extension isn't going to make a difference. So that's the discrete differences, if you like, between them. Was there a second part to that question, Kirsty?
No, it was just asking the difference between cancellation and extension.
Okay, hopefully that's explained that then.
Yeah. Okay. And one last one, just this person saying that they're in QT, a lot of the concerns are around organisation, behaviour management, and challenge and support. They've said that this is hard to judge now that things are remote. And if you had any suggestions there, obviously it's a very unusual and new experience for everyone involved.
Yeah, so I think it's about making the most of the opportunity they've got when they come back into a fully operational school. So I think what we will find is that the recommendations coming in with the interim 2 profiles, I think, will be very similar to the recommendations that came in with the interim 1 profiles, because for the majority of probationers, there's not been the chance to actually, demonstrate, if you like, that we've made progress in these specific areas. I think the best thing that you can do with a probationer coming back in now is to actually, first of all, install some share some self-belief with them that there is time for them to show that they can meet the SFR, in these areas. So one of the things that's come through is that there's a feeling of lack of self-belief within the probationers, and they really don't know if they can do it. So I think one of the important things is to give them the confidence that they can make a difference between now and the summer. I would be very clear with the action plan that they have, and to be really clear with them about what your expectations are, what you need to see, what you need to be able to evidence in their teaching. I would help them find different sources of professional learning. So whether it's some reading, whether it's what's on social media, what is there on YouTube and TED Talks. Are there other teachers that they can go and shadow? So it's not all about you having to be, in the classroom as a supporter, if you like, actually helping them. But I think the key thing is that the probationer needs to have the understanding of what they actually need to be able to evidence, and maybe there's a timeline that could go in with that. The rubric that was shared in October or November, that might be quite handy in terms of looking at the progress towards meeting the SFR, and a bit of making sure you keep the confidence there of the probationers so that they feel that they can actually make that difference and have a really good go at meeting the SFR. Okay.
Thanks, Elaine. I'm going to leave the questions for that section there just to let you continue.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, we'll just have a bit of time at the end. So,
yeah,
and if there's, and I think Elaine and the team will be able to answer any questions on an individual basis, if we don't get
absolutely. If there's anything unanswered at the end, don't worry, we'll come back and we'll drop you an email, just to let you know what the answer for that is, because I think I'm creating more questions as I go along. So the next part then is actually about the case overview. I put the link in here. I knew it wouldn't work, right? But I just put the link in here so that you've got it. When you get the slides, you can have a look for it. So it's in the Into Teaching website, and you go into Teacher Induction Scheme and then into Extensions and Removals, and you'll see all of the paperwork around there for the case overview. So it's really worth going into that first of all and just having a look at it and trying to become familiar with it. I tried this before, so I don't know why I've done that. Okay, I'm going to go in and actually just share with you the actual document. Are you able to see that, Kirsty?
Yeah, I can see that fine.
Yep, okay. So this is the case overview document, which I'm hoping I'm able to scroll down. So what I'm struggling to do, Kirsty, is to actually scroll down the document.
I can see the mouse moving. I wonder if you enable editing, if that might help. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I bet that does. Yeah, see, that's how I've got Kirsty on hand. Great, okay. So as you'll see, a Word document, so the great thing is you can complete this online, okay? Or, you know, you can do a handwritten if you want, but easier, I think, if you just complete online. There's lots that you can do in preparation before you're actually putting in the content, you know, just down to these details here, which I don't know, but if you're like me, I like doing the easy bits like that. It makes me feel like I've made actually a start at the document. As I mentioned before, you'll see that the very first questions there in part 1 are about grievance, or if there's been any disciplinary action within the last 5 years. And basically, you'll see there at the bottom that if the answer to either of those questions is yes, then it's return that form as far as you've got, and you'll receive advice from the GTC about whether to continue or not. Okay, so we do find that it does happen on occasion where there's an investigation, you know, ongoing while this is coming in. So onto the list of evidence there. You'll like that. Please add further rows as required. Okay, so you can imagine once you start getting involved in this, there can be quite a lot of evidence, particularly if, so for example, you may have a probationer that you recommend for extension, and you submit 12 pieces of evidence in that case overview, okay? The probationer then goes and does their extension, and unfortunately at the end of that extension they're recommended for cancellation because they're still not meeting the SFR. A case overview is obviously required when they're first recommended for extension and then when they're recommended for cancellation. The good news is it's the same case overview, you would just add to it. Okay, so if, for example, you're completing a case overview for a probationer that you're recommending for extension, you submit 12 pieces of evidence. When that probationer goes on and does their extension, if there's a case overview required at the end of that for cancellation, the school where the probationer has done the extension would just add to that case overview. That's the reason that when there's an extension, so it could be, for example, that you're recommending a probationer for extension and actually you're pretty confident that they're going to make or they're going to meet the SFR at the end of the extension, and it seems a lot of work to go to prepare the case overview. The reason for us insisting on the case overview is that if that probationer goes, they're recommended for extension, they go and do the extension, and let's say that they have a break, some time out before they actually go and do that extension. They then go on, they do their extension, and it's not meeting the SFR. They're recommended for cancellation. That would be a huge ask at that point to go back to the original school to say, could you do a case overview, which led up to the recommendation for extension. So that's the reason that we asked for it at the time. But I appreciate it's, you know, it's a big ask, and it's something that, you know, you're thinking, do I really have to do this? But it's actually easier to be doing it now than, you know, 12 months down the line, somebody coming back and saying, could you pull the evidence together? So what this is requiring is all the supplementary evidence to the profiles. So remember that whatever is in the profiles is not required. You have to trust the system that if this goes to a panel, the panel will have read in the greatest of detail the profiles. Okay, and having seen this system in action, they will have read them. Okay, they will know the content of those profiles. So what you're submitting is anything on top of that. So you know how sometimes in the profiles it's basically a summary of supporter meetings, or it's a summary of the action plan, or it's a summary that's put in the PDAP and things like that. You want to be able to add in any other things that you've got as evidence, and that might be, as I say, you know, parental complaints, feedback from parents' evenings, some comments that have been made by a stage partner, those sorts of things, and you want to clearly label them. So document 1 may be supplementary observations, document 2 may be feedback from parents' evening, document 3 may be a letter of complaint from a parent, document 4 may be anonymous comments made by pupils, you know, so those are the sort of things, and you just want to make sure that they're very clearly labelled within your document, within your case overview. Quite simply, you can photocopy, and it's difficult depending on whether you're in school or out of school, but if you're in school, you can photocopy originals and include them in the case overview, or you can scan them in and include them. As long as they're clearly labelled, we'll find them. Just make sure that they're key pieces of evidence that you're including and that it's not duplication. Okay, so whatever's within the case overview, perhaps from when somebody was recommended for an extension, if they then go on to cancellation, make sure it's not the same evidence that's being submitted, and don't submit feedback from an observation that's already within the profile. Sometimes, and Rachel will vouch for me on this, sometimes the quantity that comes in with a case overview is absolutely huge, and in a way our heart sinks when we look at it in terms of, wow, it's just so much information, but passing that on to a panel, you know, there's something about it being very succinct and to the point and exact with the evidence that it contains. Okay, so that's almost like your index, if you like, your list of evidence that's going in there. Just bear with me. Okay, so then we come to the standards, and what you'll see here is that we've got the standard for provisional registration, we've got the standard for full registration, and we've got every area of those standards. So section 1 being the professional values, section 2 being the knowledge and understanding, and section 3 being the skills and abilities. So section 1 being the values, that's self-explanatory. 2 being the knowledge and understanding, so basically, do they understand what it is that they need to be, how they teach this, and what they need to be able to teach it. And then section 3, skills and abilities, is what does it look like when it's actually being put into practice. So it might be that you have only one area of the standard that's causing you concern, or it may be that there are several areas. Typically, we would find in an extension that recommendation that there are, you know, 1, 2, maybe 3 areas that are causing concern. Cancellation, there are normally numerous areas that are causing concern. Again, that's probably another difference between a recommendation for extension and cancellation. So what you're asked to do here is to go through each of the areas of the standard and just to put Y for yes, N for no, or NG if there's no judgment made in relation to that area of the SPR or SFR. So when you go through section 1, basically, are they have they demonstrated that they have that they can demonstrate, social justice, yes or no judgment, integrity, trust and respect, professional commitment. Okay. Section 2, you're going through, and it's much more exact. It's about, so let's look at 2.1.1. So does the probationer have knowledge and understanding of the nature of the curriculum and its development? If they have knowledge and understanding at a level that's equivalent to the SPR, then that's a yes for that. And bearing in mind, when they come to you at the start of the induction year, the SPR, they've met the SPR, so all of these should have been yeses. So if you're putting a no in for SPR, that actually means that they've gone back the way, if you like, in terms of their practice. So hopefully most of the SPR ones are, if not all of them, are yes or no judgment. The area that we're really interested in then is the SFR. So by the end of the year, every one of these areas should be yes within the SFR. If you have a concern about the area, then it's going to be a no that you're putting in that box. And that's how it's then highlighted to the panel, what your areas of concern are. If it's cancellation and you feel that they are so far off the mark, then it may be that actually the SPR is also a no. That's your call, obviously. But just remember that when they have come in to join you in August, the university has already decided that they have enough evidence to show that they've met the SPR. So you're going through that, every area of the standard, and marking against the SPR and the SFR. Just remember that whatever is within there, you need to have the evidence to show this. So if you're saying, you know, that they have no knowledge of the curriculum, do you have the evidence to show it? Because that's what a panel looking at this are going to look for. Where's the evidence within the case overview to show the amount of support that you've put in this area, the clear action plan that's evidenced within the profile, and any other support that's been put in, and then what the probationer has actually been able to deliver in terms of that area. So it all has to tie up, and it's not just, you know, actually, no, I don't think they have met that, but you've got to make sure that it's linked in, that you have shared those concerns with the probationer, that is clearly in their action plan, and that you have fed back to them, and it's been transparent, if you like, that there's been a lot of communication. One of the things that we do find is that because teachers are so positive, if you like, in terms of, you know, we're all solution focused, aren't we? And we want to get there at the end of the day. Sometimes the observation feedback and the supporter session feedback, supporter meetings, it may be that you're actually sharing a concern, but sometimes it comes across so positively that if a panel or a third party is coming in and reading the evidence within the profile, you wouldn't know that there was an issue, because we're looking at solutions and we're saying that, yeah, that it's, you know, making progress. But so just make sure that your language within the profile is clearly stating that there is a concern around the area, and there's still plenty of time to do that. But make sure that that is clearly shared, so that the probationer isn't in two minds as to, is it a concern or is it not a concern? Because actually it's so positive, the feedback, I wouldn't know that it was causing concern. So make sure you do include that. So you simply go through the standard, as I say, marking that, and it may be that there's only a couple of sections there that, you know, are actually not meeting the standard. That's fine. Section B is then summarising. Sorry, I've jumped. Section B is then summarising the areas in your judgment that he or she is underperforming. What's really key about the profiles and the recommendations, and indeed the case overview, is that the recommendation that's submitted is only that. It's a recommendation. It's your judgment. It's your opinion. It still has to go to a panel to be upheld, or indeed for them to choose another route. Okay, so this is just in your opinion, in which areas is he or she underperforming, and this is your chance to put in again detail about why you're concerned without repeating what's within the profile. Okay, and you would, in this section, you can refer to the evidence the pieces of evidence above, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that are listed at the top. So without having to go into the detail the content of those, you can simply refer to them, so that a panel that's considering this would be able to just go back and look at the different pieces of evidence. So this box will expand as you type, and I would imagine for most people it's going to expand considerably as they go through. Okay, and it's probably the piece that will take you the longest. So this is the recommended outcome. So you've got 3 bullet points there to look at. So when the concerns are established in a case, when a panel comes to look at it, they can choose one of these 3 options as their outcome. They can choose that the recommendation is not upheld and they could give full registration. They could choose to give the probationer an extension, or they could choose to remove the probationer from the register, which is cancellation. Okay, and then what you're asked for is, what would you recommend? Basically, what are you suggesting? What are you recommending is the best outcome in this case, and why? Okay, and the panel will obviously take that into consideration when they make their decision. And then there's quite simply a declaration there at the bottom, which requires we require the signature of the head teacher who is making the recommendation. We need the signature of the supporter, and we need the signature as well of the probationer. And again, it's to say that this is what's being submitted. It's not that that they need to agree with everything that's within it. Okay, so that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, if you like, of the case overview. Are there any questions around that?
Yes, we've had a few come in, Elaine. I just want to say Rachel's been doing a great job just answering some in the questions.
Thanks, Rachel.
As well. So I'll just sort of start with some that she hasn't got round to. So is the probationer with an extension likely to remain within the school, or should they move if they request it?
Okay, so this is a common question. This one, the difficulty with the extension is around the funding, and I'm sure that if there was, funding that went with an extension that was pinned, if you like, to the probationer, it would be much easier. I appreciate that, for a school to be able to, or local authority to be able to accommodate an extension. Our hope is always that that an extension will be able to be accommodated, but it cannot be insisted upon. So if there isn't a suitable vacancy, or if the school feels that actually this would not be the best place for a probationer to complete their extension, then it may be that the probationer is required to go and try and find an extension elsewhere. That may be within the same local authority, which is always really helpful. If it's not possible, then what we sort of tend to ask is that the probation manager can just ask in neighbouring authorities if there is anything available. The probationer themselves can contact other local authorities, or very often what happens, or often, not very often, but often what happens is the probationer may move across to the flexible route to complete their extension instead.
Excellent. Someone's asking in regards to comments made by pupils or parents, do these need to be written down, and is permission required from these people to share it, or do they need to be anonymised?
So I've seen it both ways. When there's been a parental letter sent in, I've seen that simply being anonymised and included. The case overview and the evidence, as you can imagine, is confidential, but I think people just feel more comfortable all round if it's anonymised. And for a panel, it's not it's not important that they actually know which pupil, for example, or which parent, you know, has written the letter. So I think fair enough to anonymise. When I've seen case overviews submitted with any pupils' comments, the way that that's been managed has been the pupils, it's been senior pupils, and they've basically been asked if they are willing to share their comments. And then they have been anonymised after that, but it's very much been about, you know, seeking their approval first of all as to do they wish, you know, to share these, to formalise these comments or not, and that's been shared with their parents as well, so that they're familiar with the process. It's not something that I have often seen, but depending on what the circumstances are, I have seen it included occasionally.
Thank you. I'll just do another couple of questions again, really conscious of time,
Okay.
and getting through the presentation there. Someone's asking if an NQT has secured a permanent post and has not met the SFR due to shielding, can they still take up that post if the new school agrees to complete the extension?
Well, so what can happen? There's always a way around things like this. So my suggestion in a situation like that would be that they can't be offered or can't accept a permanent post until they've met the SFR. So what would typically happen in that sort of situation, working with HR, would be that they would be appointed to the post subject to gaining full registration, so that they're actually appointed while they've still got provisional registration. And then they would use the first part of their time in that post to complete the extension part, if you like. And then at the end of the extension, they would be recommended for full registration and could be given a permanent contract at that point. So there's always a way around it.
Thanks, Elaine. I'm just going to do one last question here. But like I say, Rachel's been working really hard to answer some of these questions as well. So we hopefully won't leave you with an unanswered question for too long. This question is, if a probationer's already had 2 extensions, can a case overview panel grant a 3rd extension?
Do you know, I don't know. I suppose they could, because that's one of their options. So actually thinking about it, yes, they will be able to. What we've confirmed, if you like, is that within the process before a panel or a case overview, is that the maximum we will go to are 2 extensions. But yeah, it is an option that's there for a panel, so they could offer a 3rd extension. The difference with an extension that's offered by a panel is that it won't always be the 12 weeks. So actually they could make an extension far longer than 12 weeks. They may feel that perhaps due to particular circumstances that they can justify why it's not cancellation, but they can see that the probationer is going to need more than 12 weeks. So they may decide to give, for example, a 100-day extension rather than a 60-day, 12-week extension. So yeah, that option would still remain.
Thanks, Elaine.
Okay, right, I'm going to move on then to the 3rd and final part. And this is just really to give you an idea of what happens following the case overview. So when you submit the case overview to the GTC, it's one of 3 copies. One is kept by you, one is given to the probationer, and one is sent to the GTC, and all of them should be signed. The more transparent the process is, the easier it makes the whole panel if it goes to a panel hearing. So everything should be open communication and everything shared with everybody, if you like. We'll receive your recommendation in the profile for extension or for cancellation, and we will note that, but we won't actually pass the case, if you like, to fitness to teach until we get the case overview, until we've got the evidence. So just, I'm not trying to put unnecessary pressure on you, it's just for you to be aware that, you know, the sooner you get that to us, the sooner we start the process. And that would simply be emailed to PLD. Sometimes for people that are local, they've handed it in the past to Clarewood House because it's been such a lengthy document to actually scan in and send. Problem just now, I would just say, is, you know, even when people are posting it, it's just to be aware that we're not in Clarewood House at the moment. We haven't got a return date yet, so we have access once a week in terms of getting mail, so it can lead to a slight delay. But whatever is the easiest way to send it to us, if you want to discuss it, just simply send us an email and we can talk that through with you. On receipt of the case overview, we hand that to our fitness to teach team, or certainly the case overview ones go straight there at that point. Everybody who submitted a case overview, or every probationer who has a case overview submitted, gets contacted by us and they get the opportunity to challenge the recommendation. And they have 14 days in which to respond to say if they wish to challenge the recommendation or not. Very few extensions will challenge the recommendation. I think they tend to just kind of get their head down and get on with it, if you like. In the case of a cancellation, a probationer has nothing to lose by challenging it. You know, at that point, they're heading for a cancellation for a removal from the register. So it's likely that they may challenge the recommendation. If they're a bit despondent, or if they've almost run out of steam around it, then they may simply accept it, but a lot of them challenge. Any profile that's submitted with a recommendation of cancellation and the case overview is considered by a panel anyway, okay? The difference being that if it's challenged, then it will be an open panel in terms of there'll be representation invited to a panel, and I'll speak about that in a minute. If it's simply a case of a panel considering the recommendation and there's not been a challenge, nobody is invited to attend. It's simply the panel considering the content, because obviously it's a huge deal, you know, to be removed from the register and no longer being able to teach, even with provisional registration. Just to say that if somebody is removed from the register through cancellation, then they are removed for a period of 2 years. After 2 years, they can apply to come back onto the register. Very few do. Could probably count on one hand the number that I've known that have tried to come back onto the register. And if they do, they need to be able to demonstrate that they have done a huge amount of learning around the areas for which they were removed from the register. So by that, I don't simply mean some professional reading. It may be, for example, that they have worked as a learning assistant for the last 2 years, and that's been about actually to gather, you know, more knowledge around classroom organisation. Here I go, classroom organisation, or curricular knowledge, you know, whatever, or assessment, whatever the areas are. It could be that they've gone back to university and they've done a PGDE. And so that's how they've overcome those areas of the standards. So it's really significant professional learning that they have to be able to demonstrate. So let's say the probationer does challenge the recommendation. It goes to a panel. Some of you will have been through the horrible process of a panel, and it is horrible. It's not pleasant for anybody. The evidence is considered by the panel. The probationer has a chance to obviously present their case, if you like. You are classed as evidence. You're not presenting a case. If you are there or the school are there, you're classed as evidence, and the panel may ask you questions, but they will have read everything that you have submitted in the greatest of detail. And the panel then decide on those 3 outcomes that we mentioned before. They decide whether to grant full registration, to grant an extension, or to remove a teacher from the register. Most likely, if a probationer has been recommended for cancellation, it's very unlikely that a panel would give them full registration, but they could give them a recommendation for an extension. If they've been an extension, they recommended for extension, they may decide to grant them full registration. So yeah, it's up to each panel, and some of you may have been through that process, and yeah, there's a lot to like about the panels, but I think it's a challenging context really for everybody as we go through. So that's really the final part to the process. Those are just a few contact details. Rachel will be delighted to see that I've put the PLD email address there. That's for the case overview and any questions you have. Or there's my email if you'd rather ask either PLD or myself something that you feel is more confidential. Please feel free, and that obviously stands for, you know, at any time throughout the year. Don't feel it has to be in the next week or so. But probably got about a minute left. Are there any questions that I can try and answer before then?
Thanks, Elaine. Yes, like I say, Rachel's been doing a great job just trying to answer some of the questions that are coming in. So thanks to Rachel for that. I think it's the first time that she's used this system as well. So, big props for that. So yeah, so I'll just try and ask out some of these questions that have come in just over the last few slides. But like I say, if we can't get around to them all, there'll be an opportunity to get back to you by email. And like I said at the beginning, a recording of this webinar will be available. So if there is anything you feel like you've missed, you'll be able to refer back to it at a later date. So someone is asking that this was sort of earlier on in the presentation, their understanding was that universities gave an exemption to PGDE students for their final placements. So is it possible / probable that some students never had the chance to show they had met SPR?
So you're absolutely right. Some students didn't get their full experience of 18 weeks of placement. What universities were asked to consider, though, was that everybody who was put onto probation, either a flexible route or teacher induction scheme, had met the standard for provisional registration. So nobody that started TIS or the flexible route should have been close to meeting the SPR, but not quite. It should have been a case of they have met the SPR, so there were no exemptions.
There's a question just after that which looks related. Would SPR have been met for NQTs who went through the postgrad and had their postgrad year cut due to the first lockdown?
Yes, so everybody met the SPR that came onto probation. What we did have was we had a group who were highlighted as requiring or would benefit from some additional support, but they had all met the SPR when they came onto probation.
Great. We've only got a couple more questions here, but if there's anything burning, you can still send them in. Someone's asking, can the probation manager accompany a school to the panel?
Yes, yes.
And last question here. So this is just referring back to something I think you said earlier, that you need to fill in whether there had been an investigation or complaint made about the probationer in the past 5 years.
Mm-hmm. So sorry, what was your question around that?
I think they were just asking, I think they were just clarifying that was the case.
Yeah, so it's because, so that's a generic statement in terms of, so that would apply, you know, for a teacher as well as a probationer. Obviously with a probationer, it's just going to be in the last year, because that's the only length of time that they've been employed, rather than 5 years. Okay.
That's it for questions that have come in. Rachel's managed to answer quite a few of them. So yeah, so Elaine's email address is there, as well as the PLD email address if anybody has any further questions or needs any help. And I'd just like to thank Elaine and Rachel for presenting today's webinar, and thank everyone for coming along as well. There'll be a very short 2-question survey at the end of this webinar, where you can let us know how useful you found this, and if there are any other webinars that you think would be helpful in your role as a supporter. And you can find some past webinars on the GTCS YouTube channel, which can be found just by typing GTCS into the search bar within YouTube. And a recording will be available as soon as possible, hopefully by the end of the week. So yeah, thank you again, and I hope everyone has a lovely afternoon.
Thanks, Kirsty. Thanks everybody for your time.